Hi guys, welcome to Top Wisdom. Today I'm going to summarize the novel called Tsotsi by Athol Fugard. So I'm gonna summarize by chapter. Gonna summarize chapter with chapter. I'm gonna summarize all the chapters that you guys need to know. So let's go. Chapter summaries. Chapter 1. It is Friday evening. Tsotsi, Peston, Butcher and Daya Asap up, sit in Tsotsi's room, drinking beer, in silence, waiting for Tsotsi to specify what job they will do that night. Baston has been passing the time with Edley. Talk. Tsotsi decides they will head to the training station where they are unsuspecting victim. Gambut Zlamini begins to head home to his wife. Gambut is a mine worker from a distant rural area. His wife is awaiting his return with the money he has earned in the past year. He is tall, jovial, hardworking and hopeful man. Butcher immediately approves of the plan, but Baston seems uneasy and curious it before reluctantly accepting. Tsotsi targets Gambut for 3 reasons. He smiled, he wore a flaming red tie, and he bought his ticket with money from his pay pocket. After everyone does their part in the murder and robbery, they leave Gambut's lifeless body on the train to discover by the passengers. Chapter 2. Tsotsi, Butcher, Baston and Dai Ep head to Sokia's tavern after the murder to have a few drinks. As they start drinking, they begin to talk about Baston vomiting after the murder of Gambut. Baston claims that the only reason he was sick and the others were not was because he has a decency unlike the rest of them. As the conversation advances, Dai-Ep and Butcher take Rosie, a girl who was also in Soki's tavern, outside to rape her. When the others leave, Baston begins to question Tsotsi about what he feels. This breaks one of Tsotsi's rules: never ask questions. Tsotsi is irritated by all questions about his personal life. Tsotsi eventually has enough and brutal beats Baston, leaving him in Sokia's place beaten close to death. Chapter 3. After beating Baston, Tsotsi leaves the shebeen, runs through the street. As he runs, he has a flashback. He sees a boy named Peter being taken away by the police. As he being taken away, he looks down the street and recognizes Tsotsi as David, his name before he changed it to Tsotsi. Tsotsi does not acknowledge the fact that Peter recognized him and just continues his game of dice. As Tsotsi lies under the blue gum tree, he begins to hear footsteps. As he hears them come closer, he moves to get a better vantage point and sees a young woman. As he studies her more, he begins to recognize the symptoms of fear and sees that she is carrying a small parcel and keeps checking over her shoulder. Tsotsi grabs her by one arm and swings her into darkness of the trees. As he pins her against the tree, she takes a parcel thrusts it into the hands of Tsotsi and runs off. The lead leaps off, and Tsotsi finds himself looking at the face of a young baby boy. He decides to keep the baby. Chapter 4. The next morning, Tsotsi heads to Kasim's shop, Ramondala General Dealer. in search of milk for the baby. Before he gets courage to go up and talk to Kasim, he exits and re-enters the store multiple times, waiting for it to empty. He is awkward and embarrassed. Nervously, Kasim sends his wife into the back room to round up their children in case Tsotsi tries to mark them. Tsotsi tries to mark them. Tsotsi goes up to the counter and asks to buy some milk. Kasim sells him a tin of condensed milk and realizes that the young man is unable to read the words on the label. After buying the condensed milk, Tsotsi takes the baby back into his room to clean it and feed it. He feels awe at the realization that a man can begin to his existence in such a state of helpless dependence. After the baby is clean and fed, he takes him to the ruins to hide him. He does not want his gang members to find it. After hiding the baby in the ruins, in the remains of Marabete house, Tsotsi begins to remember the yellow beach, the dog he had when he was a young child. Tsotsi breaks one of his 3 rules: never ask questions about the past. For the first time, he is curious about the past that he has avoided for so long. Chapter 5. Gamput Lamin is buried by Reverend Henry Ransom, and the Reverend is sore trouble after. Burying another man whose name no one knows. The cemetery is surrounded by stunted trees and a broken fence. It is a depressing place. Baston awakes painfully from his state of unconsciousness in the alley where he was dumped and moves for the first time in almost a day. He is convinced that everything in his life is unclean finished. Butcher and Dice Up begin to talk about Tsotsi beating Baston and begin to wonder what the future holds for their gang. Tsotsi, Butcher, and Die Up find each other and begin to do what they do on any other night: sit around and drink, waiting for Tsotsi to make the decision of what job they will do. Without Boston's stories, conversation ends rather quickly, and Tsotsi decides they will head into the city that night. When Boston stunts a young woman passer by who is carrying a baby, an idea dawns on Tsotsi. Tsotsi is irritated by their presence and keeps thinking about the baby, the show box, and blue gum. Chapter 6. Tsotsi, Butcher, Die wait for the shadows to become long enough so that they can head to Terminal Place, a busy commercial hub. The bus terminus in the location. When they get to the Terminal Place, Tsotsi becomes separated by Die and Butcher. He steps on Maurice Shabalala's hands, a crippled man who lost his legs in a work accident, and decides that he will be his target that night. As Maurice continues on his way home, he realizes that Tsotsi is following him. He hopes that if he continues on his way, he will lose Tsotsi before he has to go through the dark part of his journey. He stops for some food at Bantu house and then continues on his way. As he gets to the dark part of his journey, he realizes that even though he feels like a half man, he wants to live. He leaves his money in a pile underneath the light, hoping Tsotsi will just take the money and leave him alone. When Tsotsi kicks the money away, continues walking towards him, Maurice begins to throw rocks, shout insults in order to defend himself. Chapter 7. As Tsotsi follows Maurice, he begins to realize that he crawls like the yellow beach, used to dragging his body around since he doesn't have any legs. Tsotsi chooses Maurice because of his ugliness and deformity. Maurice epitomes and the ugliness of the world. Tsotsi clearly has a nihilistic view of existence. Life is pointless and human values are worthless. Tsotsi confronts Maurice in the street and tells him that he feels for him. After he does this, Maurice tells him why he wants to leave. After he tells Tsotsi all the reasons he wants to leave, he confronts him about why Tsotsi has to kill him. Tsotsi realizes that he doesn't have to kill him and that he is able to choose to let him live. Maurice tries to shame the most beautiful thing he knows, which is a mother's love for her child. Tsotsi denies the truth of the statement. He has a long walk back to his room in the township. He is plagued by thoughts of the baby Baston, the blue gums, and the beggar. He realizes that there is no turning back from this unprecedented experience of feeding a baby and sparing a man's life. Tsotsi decides he will find out who he is and what happened in the past. Exhausted, he curls up and sleeps. Hence, the meeting between the two misfits provides each with a revelation and the dawning of new meaning in their lives. Chapter 8. Baston awakes to the sound of the church bells and begins to think about his faith in God. Reverend Ransom is still disturbed by not knowing Gumboot's name. He prays to God for help. Tsotsi returns to the ruins to find the baby covered head to toe in ants, and instead of leaving it, he claims that the ants of the baby We are then taken to Waterworks Square, where a young mother by the name of Miriam Ngiti waits in the long line to get to the tap. Miriam is a single mother because her husband Simon left and never returned. Her son Simon is 6 months old. She works as a washerwoman in order to survive. Back in her room, she hears a knock at the door. Tsotsi has followed her. He threatens to kill her baby if she refuses to accompany him. Tsotsi takes her to his room and forces her to feed the baby. At first, she protests that the baby is too dirty. She says that a bitch would care for its pups better than he has been doing with this baby. This comparison has a strong effect on Tsotsi and sparks a clear memory of events that turned him into what he has become. Miriam feeds and cleans the baby. It is Sunday night and the people of the township are preparing to sleep. However, Tsotsi is wide awake. Another childhood memory has been reawakened. He is reliving the night that changed his life. Chapter 9. Tsotsi begins to remember his past. He begins to see his old home and how happy he was living with his mother. Fugard paints the picture of a loving mother and protected childhood for the young David. His mother speaks often about the imminent return of his father, whom David imagines as friendly good man. There is a stern grandmother who is skeptical skeptical about his men. Eventually, the flashbacks leads him to the events that happened on the day that his mother was taken to jail by the police in the Dompas raid, supposedly to round up illegals. She tells him to wait at home and not move. His granny arrives and leaves shortly after, again tells him not to move. As his father returns after being away from the family for a long time, he becomes furious when he finds out his wife has been taken to prison. During the outrage, the father kicks the family dog, breaking its back. The dog gives birth to a little pups that soon die. He sits next to the dead dogs for hours until he cannot bear it any longer. David runs away from home, where he is welcomed to the river gang, which is led by a boy named Peter. They share his scraps of food with him. He decides to abandon his identity and start his life under the new name Tsotsi. He stays with the gang until they are dispensed in a police raid. Later, he joins other gangs of older boys and learns the tough lessons of survival in a harsh and cruel world. Feeling the pain inflicted on others is not permitted, and memories of the past are worthless. They may be dismissed. Chapter 10. Tsotsi is awakened by a knocking at his door. His first instinct is to feel for the knife, but then he remembers the baby. It is still there at the foot of the bed, fast asleep. The knife does not bring the usual reassurance. It takes off the chain of memory, the river, the street gang, his mother, then Peter. Then up visits Tsotsi to ask about their job, their next job, and to tell him that Butcher has joined another gang. Tsotsi tells him that the gang has been disbanded and that they will no longer be doing the jobs that they used to. Then Ab leaves him and Tsotsi hears that the baby cry. Tsotsi takes out the baby, staring at it, finally realizes that the baby is helping him remember his past. Miriam comes to Tsotsi's room to feed the baby and later asks Tsotsi if she can have him because she will be able to take care of him best. Tsotsi won't let her take the baby because he is Tsotsi's baby. Tsotsi tells Miriam that the baby's name is David, and that he is not his father, but that David belongs to him. His thoughts keep returning to the memory of the river where he stayed with the street children and where they played a game called Driving to Hell and Gone in a rusty, derelict car that had crashed into the river one night. When Miriam asks Tsotsi why he wants to keep the baby, he replies, "Because I must find out." Miriam leaves and gives Tsotsi some milk for the baby. Tsotsi takes David back to the ruins. He makes the long journey to the river where he finds the pipes and the shell of motor car. Now he has confirmed his memory and the truth of all he had recalled about his past. He begins to wonder where Boston is and leaves to go and find him. Chapter 11. Tsotsi eventually first Boston passed out of the floor of Martin's shipping. The owner Matty fearlessly confronts Tsotsi and blames him for Boston's state. She orders Tsotsi to remove the filthy, stinking, drunk and injured Boston. Tsotsi helps him up and carries him back to his room to take care of him. Halfway there, Boston wakes up and realizes who is carrying him. He cries out in terror and staggers off into the darkness. Tsotsi follows Boston and finds him collapsed under a sign. He takes him back to his room. He is beginning to sense, both physically and emotionally, the extent of the pain that he has inflicted. He is disturbed and confused. Tsotsi goes off to buy bread and milk. Fugard begins to reveal to us the life that Boston has led, how he has expelled from college, how he illegally sold fake past books to people, and how a guy as smart as he become a part of the gang. For years he has been misleading his mother into thinking he is employed as a teacher. As Baston awakes, Tsotsi begins to tell him about experience with Maurice and ask him questions about how he is changing. Baston tells him that they are all sick of life and seek God. Baston leaves in search of his mother. Chapter 12. Isaiah, the caretaker, bell ringer, and gardener at Ravenna Ransom Church, sits in the church garden planting flowers where Tsotsi, who is on his way to seek redemption from God, finds him. Miss Marriott, who works in the church office, is trying to get Isaiah to plant seedlings in a straight row. Isaiah and Tsotsi strike up a conversation. He explains how he works for God and that when he rings the church bell, it calls it to all the other people who believe in God. Isaiah invites him back next time the bells ring to find God. Tsotsi feels unnaturally light, almost as if is floating. Tsotsi finds Miriam again to feed the baby. As she feeds the baby, Tsotsi realizes that mothers really do love their children and that in order for you to move into the future, you have to let your past go. Miriam asks him to have let have let her have the baby again, but he does not leave the baby with her because he doesn't quite trust her yet. After he goes to church, Tsotsi decides that will go back he will go back to his childhood name, David Mandondo. As he heads back to the ruins, he hears bulldozers taking down the walls. He runs into the building only focused on one thing, finding the baby. He runs straight to the corner where the baby lay, where he and the baby would be crushed by the ceiling. The workers who recover his body minutes later agree that his smile is beautiful and strange for a Tsotsi. Tsotsi search for his true identity as David Mandondo and for some kind of meaning to his life ends with a final act of sacrifice as he dies in attempt to save his alter ego, the baby David.